Welcome to Pages and Pots. This episode is titled René Schwaller de Lubitz, Egypt, Intelligence of the Heart and the Pharaonic Mind. When you think of ancient Egypt, does your imagination drift into pictures of pyramids, tall statues of pharaohs, and toppled columns of ancient empires? Is it shrouded in mythology, superstition, or a civilization lost in time? What René and Isha Schaller de Lubitz discovered unsettled mainstream Egyptologists. They envisioned Egypt as a complete spiritual science, a culture fully in touch with the concept of one emanating creator, the nascent spark of the solar Christ. What's more, their knowledge was not buried by sands or crushed by empires. It was encoded into hieroglyphs, preserved to this day, and still intelligible to those willing to learn how to see. This podcast series is about the way of seeing. Let's begin this discovery by understanding René Schwaller. He was born in 1887 in Alsace-Lorraine to a Jewish mother and a non-Jewish father, giving him matrilineal Jewish descent under Jewish law. His early years were shaped by his father's disciplined work in chemistry and material science, and by his mother's cultivation of imagination and inward perception. As an adult, René spent time in Paris where he worked under Henri Matisse, one of the leading modernist painters of the century. His fascination with Matisse inspired him to experience a different mode of perception, the world of form, color, and proportion. They were no longer fixed representations of reality. They could be experienced as an inner movement of consciousness. Reality was not to be observed, it was participatory. At the same time, René read many of Goethe's scientific writings, especially Farbenlehre. He learned that color arises from the dynamic interaction between light, darkness, and human perception rather than from simply light alone. It treats color as a lived qualitative phenomenon, known through personal experience, not some abstraction. Around the end of World War I, René briefly crossed paths with the Parisian group known as Les Valeurs. Unfortunately, Wikipedia casts René as an anti Semite because of his association with some of its members. As if that explains the nature of the man, it does not. The association was brief. The accusations made are poorly documented and had no bearing on René's future work. In fact, he later publicly acknowledged Jewish persecution and explicitly called for reparations. To cast doubt on René's work based on this episode is not scholarship, it's defamation. And now we can set that aside and move on. What did matter in this period of René's life in Paris was his encounter with Jean-Julien Champagne, whose pen name was Fulcanelli, an alchemist who combined the metaphysics of alchemy with a path towards initiation. Fulcanelli taught René how practical and spiritual alchemy were inseparable paths, that to transmutate physical matter is linked to the transformation of oneself. The best illustration of this is the magician of the tarot. Material metamorphosis depends on the lawful ordering of consciousness itself, where inner coherence becomes the operative force acting upon a substance. This understanding unlocked René's ability to perceive what he would call the Pharaonic mind. Fulcanelli further refined René's sense of sacred space through the study of Gothic cathedrals as alchemical architectures in stone. Through this, René recognized that symbolic science could be embodied and transmitted through monumental forms, think pyramids, rather than text alone. In 1919, René was given the name de Lubitz by the poet Oscar Vladislas de Lubitz Milosz. The name was imparted as a blessing. He saw that René understood how myth, poetry, and symbols were ontological instruments, not literary artifacts. Symbols are not inventions of the human mind used to explain reality. They arise as the means by which reality itself discloses inner order. In this sense, the symbol is not representational, but a revelation, an active gesture which the divine becomes perceptible within the world. In 1922, René met his spiritual counterpart, Isha, and together they left Paris to found Suhalia, an alpine retreat and research center near St. Moritz, Switzerland. They married in 1926. At Suhalia, their work in homeopathy and color was oriented towards a unified, non-mechanistic science seeking to reconcile light, number, matter, and consciousness into a theory of reality. In this sense, they pursued a unified field of spiritual material understanding, paralleling how contemporary physicists of the day sought a unified field of physical phenomena. In the winter of 1925, during a period of intense isolation and work, René experienced what he understood as an encounter with a guiding intelligence he called Aor. He published his experience in a book titled The Call of Fire. René did not treat Aor as a metaphor or a fantasy, but as a guiding intelligence like your spiritual guides, urging him to reach beyond dualistic thought. The central insight was to find how unity differentiates into a multiplicity without losing itself, just as light refracts into color without ceasing to be light. The message would lead the Schwallers into a metaphysical insight into the Egyptian mystery known as the Neiters and lay the foundation for what they referred to as the intelligence of the heart. In 1936, at Isha's insistence, the Schwallers traveled to Luxor, Egypt. They did not go searching for a revelation. They knew that already. They went to test whether what they'd already discovered was real. And as they expected, the temples did not symbolize cosmic order. They were cosmic order, embodied in stone through proportion, orientation, rhythm, and number, perceptible only through what they called the intelligence of the heart. Through a spiritual alchemy of perception, the Schwallers read hieroglyphs as living memory rather than inert signs. They spent 15 years immersed in that reality, and René explained it in his book titled The Egyptian Miracle. One of René's most challenging ideas appears early in The Egyptian Miracle, where he wrote that a cause has no reality until it is lived, until it meets resistance and becomes action. For the Pharaonic mind, reality is not a priori. It comes into being through lived participatory acts, a truth René recognized as the convergence of consciousness, ritual action, and form, giving rise to meaning within the physical world. This is why Pharaonic Egypt cannot be understood through simple or exact translations of the hieroglyphs, which sever the signs from the lived reality that generated them. René insisted that soul and nature are distinct from each other, yet they are governed by the same laws. This is the unity of spiritual and objective alchemy. He called this unity the magic of analogs. Things we observe in nature, such as growth, decay, rhythm, and proportion, can be understood within the human body and mind. In this view, the magic is simply reality itself emanating from a divine source, understood in his Egyptian framework as a solar creative principle. For René, creation cannot be altered, but it can be lived with intent through alignment with its laws. You do not manipulate its effects. You live within its truth. Isha Schaller de Lubitz, René's creative partner and guiding force, brought her own spiritual wisdom forward with her published works, giving voice to an initiatory understanding of the couple's discoveries. Where René focused on a lawful structure, Isha brought us an emotionally centered conceptualization of the intelligence of the heart using dialogue and syllogism. She invites the reader to a lived experience. In her works such as Erbach and Journey into the Light, she presents Egyptian cosmology as something that unfolds relationally, employing a dialogical method reminiscent of Plato, where story and discussion disclose the mysteries. In the final sections of Journey into the Light, Isha draws parallels between Egyptian initiation, Christ consciousness, and Melchizedek. For Isha Schaller de Lubitz, Christ is not an ideological personification, but a solar heart-centered force, an awakened consciousness mediating heaven and earth rather than a doctrine to be believed. She invokes Melchizedek as a timeless priesthood beyond genealogy and law, not merely an archetype, but an enduring initiatory presence within human consciousness that bears and advances the redeeming impulses of the solar Christ across history. Isha's understanding of the Christ principles aligns closely with Rudolf Steiner. She uses narrative to draw the reader into a personal encounter with the solar Christ and the timeless transmission of spiritual knowledge. In the work of René and Isha Schaller de Lubitz, Egypt does not dissolve into the past, but remains alive. Its pharaonic initiation guarded by keepers of the threshold, who bar entry into those lacking the intelligence of the heart. What's more, in modern times, physical access is obstructed by those who deny the past itself. Ancient Egypt is neither myth nor superstition, but a complete spiritual science. We will follow them into a living world of hieroglyphs, gods as principalities and universal order and enacted meaning that co-creates reality where alchemical wisdom is disclosed only to those prepared to receive it. Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with the next episodes of the series. Leave a comment. I'm open to suggestions. And of course, like the video because YouTube likes it when you like it too.